of course, as well. I think, as I said, we're just scratching the surface, but we think that there's a lot of interesting things there, and I think certainly love your ideas on that. Publisher and user controls, but that is kind of a catch-all, but that just simply means more control, but not just for the publishers, not just for admin. I mean, I think admin and moderation tools, we have to and have spent a lot of time on that because that's been a big pain point for a long time. And so there's been some pretty sophisticated sort of filtering tools and automating tools and sort of mobile apps and so forth to make that easier. But I think the other big thing is giving users also ownership and control over their contributions, like I was just mentioning a second ago. And again, I think we've seen some reasonable progress there, but we think there's more kind of ownership and control and autonomy almost that we can give to users so that they really feel more invested in commenting. The third is another thing that Clay kind of touched on, which was, he calls it intervention, we call it sort of author, in here we call it author/expert engagement. That, 4 or 5 years ago, it was pretty rare, it seemed, to see like the actual writer or the author to engage in the comments, with the exception of, certainly like the techie blogs that we're all sort of hip and savvy to. They were always early on in that way, but in terms of more mainstream sites or larger sites, pretty rare to see that. And literally, and even when I joined Disqus, which was about 2.5 years ago, it was still kind of rare to see that. And probably in the last 6 to 9 months, I mean, it's been that recent, where I've noticed a change, even in the biggest media companies, that we talk to all the time, where they're saying, we want, and we're now almost mandating, not quite there, but almost, that certain authors or all of our writers, pay as much attention to their comment communities as, quite frankly, they do to their Twitter feeds. Why? I mean, why neglect what's in your own house, right? So that's something where we are seeing another, as I say, light at the end of the tunnel, and that's another area where we see a pretty high correlation where when, and this isn't just about moderation, this is about people knowing that there's a kind of a voice of authority there in the conversation, they're listening, they're going to talk back with you, etc. When that happens, almost always we see a sort of a boost in the overall quality and quantity of engagement. And then the fourth thing here is kind of a little cutesy term that we've kind of coined internally, but this refers to the duality or the dichotomy between anonymity, but with that comes a certain sense of freedom, right? And on the other side of that spectrum would be real world identity. But some people argue that then it can stifle, participation and whistleblowers and so forth, whatever will be discouraged. And those are, there's really valid arguments on both sides, quite frankly. And I sometimes refer to this as the sort of the 4chan Facebook dilemma. You can kind of think of those two as the ends of the of that spectrum. And we think that there's, again, it'll definitely vary from site to site. Each one has their own standards of what they think is correct, but we think that there's a middle ground, an interesting middle ground there, which we call accountable anonymity. And I think we should talk, that's one thing I'd really like to talk about more when we get done brainstorming, but really that means, actually, I didn't know that I was going to have an internet connection, but now that I do, let me show you an example of this, which is one of my favorite examples. One of my favorite, I mean, a lot of you guys would probably find this person annoying because he types in all caps, but one of my favorite Disqus community members who, I don't know, some of you guys may be familiar with. But this is a guy who calls himself Fake Grimlock. You want to know Fake Grimlock? No? You guys never? All right. He's all over the place. But he's like, he tweeted with him, commented with him. He's like a real person. He works in DC for some IT department or something. But no one really knows his name, but he's very present. And he's very sort of authentic, and he writes, he rewrites really substantive stuff. But he has this whole persona where he talks like a robot dinosaur, and I mean it's some people find it annoying. I find it absolutely hilarious. You know, I mean, actually, he's very active on Fred Wilson's blog, if some of you guys read that. And I remember we saw him very active on like TechCrunch and some other blogs before he kind of stumbled on Fred's site. And you know, we kind of knew him, we thought he was amusing, and then he started writing some really, you know, well thought out comments, but in his vernacular of, you know, without pronouns and things like that. And, you know, like, Fred himself started to, like, at first I think he wrote a comment like, "What's your deal, dude?" or something like that. And then a couple of weeks later, he was like liking his comments and like, you know, we need more fake gremlins, etc. I mean, so this is kind of, again, I'd like to dive deeper into this concept because we're still baking it a little bit, but this is kind of what we mean by accountable anonymity, where this is a person who may not feel comfortable sharing his real name, but he has a track record. I mean, he has, you know, 800, 900 comments, and you can see where all he's been, and he's hooked up his Twitter account, and so, you know, he has a reputation, and if he ever got banned, or if he, you know, for whatever reason endangered that, you know, he would lose a lot. I mean, there's you know, there's real sort of stakes for him to keep that up, and so, or her, who knows, right? So that's another thing that we see, again, sort of in our getting there bucket, but we're pretty bullish on that more innovation can be done, and I think you'll see a lot more. I think you'll see Disqus as a company, without giving too much away. I think you'll see us kind of dabbling in what we can do there. And the last bucket, I'm doing on time, by the way, Chris. Almost. Okay. Last bucket is, so good progress, getting there, and then, yeah, you know, like, shoot, man, you know, like there's some issues that, you know, if we're being honest with ourselves, they haven't changed that much, at least since we've been around. I'm going to try to go really quick because I know I'm probably already way over. But 99.1, some of you guys may be familiar with that. That basically refers to the adage about, you know, 90% of your visitors are just kind of passive lurkers, 9% will contribute in some way, and then 1% are sort of the regular, you know, kind of hyper contributors. And, you know, I showed you some of our traffic stats, like we're at something like our overall reach, you know, so that the 90% of that, our overall reach is something like 480 million uniques or something. And it turns out that about 9% of that is how many people are actually commenters of that 400 whatever million. And it probably turns out about 1% of those, or maybe it's actually a little bit higher, but are kind of the real regular active ones. And so that's an issue, though, that, you know, we'd like to see. Maybe it's something structural about it, but we'd like to see that addressed in a better way. What is it? What can we do to get that 90 more engaged? Maybe not full-fledged commenting, but, you know, at least noticing the comments and sort of reacting in some way. Curation and cold start, I think, are kind of problems that sites have that are like basically two different problems. So curation tends to be for sites that have a lot of volume, but it's just a lot, you know, it's hard to separate out signal from noise and hard to know what to do with it all. Cold start is just, you know, I mean, tumbleweed communities, it just never gets off the ground for whatever reason, and partly that's because sometimes it just takes a lot of work to do it. You know, I don't know that there's any silver bullet for that, but that's, I think, something that is still kind of an issue that we see. And then this last word, which I had to look up, and it is apparently a real word, I didn't think it was, but tangibility, which is actually what Phil kind of, I think, touched upon in his great article or blog post. If any of you guys haven't read that, it was, I guess, on the PBS site, and was it somewhere else? Or anyway, read it. It is one of the best things we've seen in terms of a comprehensive view of the issues and problems and opportunities and commenting. And one of the things was, you know, there's a lot of indirect benefits to publishers and users, but it just, for whatever reason, often doesn't feel very tangible and concrete to people. And so kind of linking those dots together on what am I really getting out of this, both as a publisher and a user, I think something that we'd like to see addressed more. And so with that, I mean, I just want to definitely offer up myself if we can provide any kind of help, but especially with, I don't know if any of you guys are actually participating in the challenge, but if there's anything that people want to do, like with our API or data or whatever, you know, I'm not one of the technologists, but I'm happy to see what we can do because we're really excited about the project. So, thank you.